I am Nirmala Thakur from EduExcel. I am here again with another episode which will help the teachers to enhance their knowledge base. We are all aware that the National Education Policy NEP 2020 is India's most recent and comprehensive framework for transforming its education system, launched by the government in July 2020 to make education more inclusive, holistic, and future ready. The key features and structures: the policy introduces the 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 structure that replaces the old 10 plus 2 systems, aligning educational stages with children's development needs from ages 3 to 18. The NEP encourages a move away from rote memorization and promotes critical thinking, ethical values, and conceptual understanding. The policy's rollout is ongoing and phased, with several states including Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Telangana, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Rajasthan, Assam, and Chhattisgarh at various stages of implementation. The NEP 2020 marks a historic shift towards 21st century skills, inclusiveness, and global relevance for Indian education, while also addressing traditional strengths and indigenous knowledge. Lala Lajpat Rai's educational vision has a strong connection to the core objectives of NEP 2020, particularly in its emphasis on Indian values, inclusivity, and holistic development. Lajpat Rai championed an education system that went beyond colonial frameworks, focusing on patriotism, individual empowerment, ethical values, and connection to Indian culture. He insisted education should create thoughtful, proactive, and globally aware citizens, principles at the heart of NEP 2020's holistic and multidisciplinary approach. The policy aims to strengthen national consciousness alongside preparing students for the modern world, reflecting Rai's ideals about combining Indian ethos with global outlook. Influence in NEP 2020. In the principles, NEP 2020 reimagines curricula to be rooted in Indian ethos, integrating ancient knowledge, value based learning, and pride in diversity, echoing Rai's calls for a truly national education system. The policy's drive for equity, accessibility, and education for all is linked directly to Rai's advocacy for democratized education access and empowerment. Lasting legacy and practical implementation. Many of Rai's suggestions, including integration of Indian knowledge systems, emphasis on ethical education, and the development of national character, are now key components in NEP's curricular reforms. The NEP's thrust towards experiential, competency based learning and moving away from rote memorization also traces its lineage to Rai's progressive, student centered pedagogical philosophy. Lala Lajpat Rai's influence endures through NEP 2020's holistic, Indian rooted, and student focused reforms, affirming his legacy as a visionary in shaping the educational ideals of modern India. Lajpat Rai was a pioneering nationalist thinker who viewed education as the foundation for building a strong, modern, and independent India. He believed that the British colonial education system was designed to create a passive, dependent society and wanted Indian education to instead develop proactive, thoughtful citizens with patriotism and national consciousness at its core. Patriotism and nationalism as core subjects. Lajpat Rai pushed for teaching patriotism and nationalism as regular classroom subjects. Students should learn to love India as a whole beyond local loyalties and be made aware of the country's history, resources, achievements, and unity. Mother tongue inclusivity. He advocated for using provincial languages as the medium of instruction at the primary level to enhance understanding and connection. At the same time, he saw Hindustani as a future national language and opposed the over dominance of English at early stages, though he recommended compulsory English in later elementary years. Holistic and modern curriculum. His proposals included subjects such as hygiene, drawing, geography, Indian local history, civics, music, modeling, and modern sciences. He insisted on free textbooks in primary schools and standardized curriculum nationwide. Vocational and scientific education. Lajpat Rai wanted welfare focused vocational education. This meant not just technical or trade skills, but a broader development economic, scientific, social, civic intelligence so every individual could contribute to national progress. Intellectual freedom and secularism. He stood for educational institutions being open to all castes, creeds, and communities, temples of learning for all, promoting inclusive growth. He was wary of making religious instructions like compulsory theology or Sanskrit the backbone of education. Empowering citizens. The real aim, he stressed, was to create self reliant, responsible citizens, not just subject to authority, but able to think, act, and serve society independently. For Lajpat Rai, education was a national project vital to change the general psychology of our people to create in them a zest for real life. He regarded the development of indigenous knowledge and educational institutions run on nationalist and modern lines as essential for the democratic progress, economic prosperity, and the liberation of the country. He argued that educational institutions would be like temples for all to enter and worship, regardless of caste, color, and creed. The development and economic prosperity of the nation would lead to salvation and freedom from misery, poverty, disease, ignorance, and slavery of every kind in this life, now and here, for ourselves and our successors. Lala Lajpat Rai portrait from the February 1920 issue of Young India. He says Lajpat Rai's vision deeply influenced the educational reform and nation building in India, paving the path for the holistic, inclusive, and learner centric approaches seen in later Indian education policies. Lala Lajpat Rai powerfully linked education to national pride and patriotism by reimagining it as a tool for awakening India's national consciousness, unity, and self reliance. Learning from global models. Rai studied education systems in countries like Germany, Japan, France, and observed that their citizens had strong patriotic feelings because patriotism and national identity were integral parts of their education. This inspired him to stress that only through a nationalized education could India foster patriotism on a wide scale. Curriculum with national purpose. He emphasized that India's curriculum should include Indian history and achievements so students could take pride in their country's heritage, stories and lessons from the lives of great personalities, the teaching of nationalism as a classroom subject so every young Indian would develop a sense of belonging and a duty towards the nation, the use of Indian languages for instruction to deepen students' cultural connections and foster inclusivity, creation of national institutions. Lajpat Rai helped establish institutions such as Dayanand Anglo-Vedic DAV College and National College at Lahore, whose explicit mission was to create patriotic nationalist citizens. Teachers were chosen for their nationalist outlook and Education was closely tied to the independence movement. Education for service and sacrifice. He advocated that education should not be individualistic but instill in each student a sense of service, sacrifice, and collective action for the motherland. He believed serving the country was the highest ideal and education had to nurture this spirit. 5. Intellectual self respect. Rise encouraged learning about Indian ideals, philosophy, and achievements, aiming to restore India's self respect undermined by the colonial rule. He promoted reading in Indian languages and saw national education as insurance for the country's future to protect against oppression by developing enlightened, proud citizens. Number 6, concrete actions. He was involved in founding and supporting DAV institutions, donating personal resources, and advocating for a network of schools and colleges with a nationalistic ethos run for and by the Indians, not colonial authorities. In summary, Lala Lajpat Rai's vision of education was inseparable from his vision of nationhood. He believed an independent, proud, united India could rise only by educating each generation to love and serve their country purposefully and consciously. Lala Lajpat Rai's main ideas for transforming colonial education in India focused on replacing the British imposed system, which he saw as creating weak, passive subjects, with a modern, nationally driven education designed to empower Indians, instill critical thinking, and foster a sense of self reliance and national pride. Psychological transformation. Rai argued that the purpose of education should be to transform the psychology of Indian people, making them thoughtful, proactive individuals instead of passive subjects created by colonial schooling. Adoption and adaptation of global best practices. He studied educational systems abroad, that is in the US systems, European systems, and Japanese system. Uh, Towards adapting their strengths like pragmatism, individuality, progressive pedagogy to Indian needs. Promotion of a modern and progressive outlook. Lajpat Rai wanted education to reflect the need for a globally aware, modern, and progressive society in India, freeing minds from colonial influence and preparing citizens for democratic participation. Building a national education system, he envisioned a nationalistic education model to counter the colonial one, focusing on both individual growth and collective responsibility to support the nation's development. Pedagogy for critical thinking. Rai advocated pedagogical reforms that would foster independent thought, encourage questions, and eject rote learning in favor of understanding and creativity. Rice supported the use of Indian languages, inclusion of Indian history and culture, and efforts to ensure education was accessible to all, moving away from the elitist and West oriented practices. Preparation for self governance. He saw reformed education as essential for nurturing citizens capable of participating in and sustaining democratic self governance in an independent India. In essence, Lala Lajpat Rai's ideas sought to turn colonial education meant to create loyal subjects on its head, turning it into a system that prepared Indians for freedom, responsible citizenship, and national development. Lajpat Rai emphasized teaching patriotism as a subject in schools because he believed that instilling a sense of national pride, loyalty, and duty from an early stage was essential for creating responsible citizens and and building and defending a free, strong India. His reasons were building national identity. Rai saw education as key to fostering a shared Indian identity, he felt that colonial education made Indians feel inferior and divided, so teaching patriotism would unite students around a common purpose and heritage. Promoting civic responsibility. He argued that patriotism in education would develop responsible citizens willing to serve and sacrifice for their country rather than just seeking personal success or serving colonial interests. Counteracting colonial influence. By embedding patriotism in the curriculum, Rai hoped to challenge the passivity and dependency fostered by colonial schooling, creating youth who would confidently stand up for India's rights and participate in the national movement. Inspiring collective action. Patriotism would motivate students to work together for India's progress, encouraging cooperation across regional, linguistic, and community lines. Empowering future generations. He believed that making patriotism a subject would help students grow up with pride in India's culture, history, and achievements, empowering them to envision and realize a developed, self reliant India. In summary, Rai wanted patriotic teaching to nurture a new mindset, one that valued India and prepared students to actively contribute to national development and freedom. Lajpat Rai's international observations had a strong influence on his vision for Indian education. During his travels abroad, Rai extensively studied the education systems of countries like the United States, Germany, Japan, and France. He carefully examined their structures, curricula, teaching methods. He noted that these countries emphasized pragmatic, learner centric education aimed at developing individual initiative, critical thinking, and national pride, factors that contributed to their social progress and strong national identities. Rai believed India needed to adapt the best features of these global education systems while tailoring them to India's unique social cultural contexts. His exposure to modern and progressive education internationally convinced him that the colonial education system imposed by the British was designed to create a passive subjects, not empowered citizens. This realization motivated him to advocate an education system that would produce thoughtful and proactive individuals ready to participate in democratic self governance. He stressed that Indian education must engage with modern sciences, languages, and ideas, freeing Indian mind from colonial influences and equipping them to compete and thrive globally while retaining a strong sense of Indian identity. In essence, Rai's global study helped him formulate a vision of national education as a vehicle for psychological, social, and political transformation, one that would prepare India's youth for independence and national development by blending global modernity with patriotic Indian values. The key points on the role of education in political freedom, according to Rai, was as follows. Awakening national consciousness. Rai stressed that education had to awaken the political and national consciousness among Indians. It was not just about literacy or technical skills, but also about cultivating a profound awareness of India's history, culture, rights, duties as citizens. Creating leaders and patriots. He saw education as essential in producing leaders and activists who understood their political rights and responsibilities. These educated individuals would form the backbone of the nationalist movements that sought independence through both constitutional and revolutionary means. Psychological empowerment. Education was a tool to overcome mental slavery imposed by colonialism. Rai argued that political freedom required Indians to first liberate their minds through education that instilled self respect, pride, and critical thinking. Instrument of social and political reform. He believed education could simultaneously be a means to nurture democratic values, social reforms, and political activism necessary for nation building and self governance. Promoting unity and patriotism. By incorporating patriotism and nationalism as vital parts of education, Rai wanted to forge unity among diverse Indian communities and inspire collective efforts for freedom. Practical preparation for self governance. Education would prepare Indians not only mentally and politically, but also practically for responsibilities of managing their own affairs post independence. In summary, Rai viewed education as the first and most fundamental steps towards India's political awakening and freedom, as it created an informed, motivated, and united citizenry capable of leading and sustaining the struggle for independence. Lala Lajpat Rai believed Western education and modern curricula were essential for India's progress for several reasons. Number one, access to modern knowledge and science. Rai emphasized that modern sciences, rational thinking, and Western knowledge were crucial for India's development in an increasingly industrialized and scientific world. Without this, India would fall behind globally. Number two, pragmatic and practical education. He saw Western education as a more scientific, systematic, and useful compared to traditional systems. It equipped learners with practical skills and modern outlook necessary for nation building. Number three, breaking colonial mentality. Rai believed modern education was a means to overcome the intellectual limitations imposed by colonial rule. It helped Indians develop critical thinking, self respect, and confidence to challenge oppression. Number four, building competent leadership and workforce. Western education trained Indians to enter administration, medicine, law, and engineering, creating a modern educated class capable of leading India's social, economic, and political reforms. Number five, incorporating English language. He supported English as the medium for higher education and modern sciences because it connected India to global knowledge and opportunities, despite also valuing Indian languages at lower levels. Number six, national renaissance and progress. Rai and other reformers saw Western education as a vehicle for India's renaissance, a revival into modernity, progress, and self governance, aligning India with global advancements without losing national identity. In summary, Rai championed Western and modern curricula not to replace Indian culture but to complement it with scientific knowledge, critical thinking, and practical skills essential for India's advancement and freedom in the modern world. Hence, we see that Lala Lajpat Rai's educational ideals centered on accessible, culturally rooted, flexible, and holistic learning form a philosophical backbone to major reforms introduced in NEP 2020, ensuring India's education system remains both nationally conscious and globally relevant. Thank you for listening to this episode. I will be bringing you more such episodes in the future, which will help the teachers in understanding and implementing the guidelines given by the National Education Policy 2022 successfully in their schools. Thank you.